Hello there, Gamerinos and Gamerinas. Welcome to UnicornStorm. This is Rady, and today we're taking a look at Horizon Forbidden West. I actually didn't want to buy this game at launch, at least at first. But I've seen it called PlayStation's Breath of the Wild, and since I made a video back then when Zero Dawn and Breath of the Wild first released, where I compared the two and came to the conclusion that Horizon was a very shallow and casual open world exploration game, albeit a very competent one, it wanted to make you feel powerful, while Breath of the Wild gave you true freedom and wanted you to work for your success. So with that background, I decided to give Zero Dawn's sequel a look to see if it went more in the direction of Breath of the Wild. And well, after having played Forbidden West for a decent amount, I can say no. It's not like Breath of the Wild. It's all in all just more Zero Dawn, which is a good thing if you enjoyed the first game, as many people have. I know I have. And to be honest, the sequel refined a lot of aspects of the first game and gave the whole experience a bit more depth. Foraging presents you with a lot of different resources right from the start that you need for different upgrades, other than Zero Dawn's generic all-purpose resources, at least in the beginning and for the first few upgrades. Though to be fair, the more interesting resource scavenging in the first game was hunting for machine components from the game's iconic robotic wildlife, where you had to forgo an easy kill in order to specifically target the components, because any component attached to the machine gets destroyed as soon as it's killed. And the system is back in this game and works as well as it did in the first. Climbing got a bit more complex. You now don't have to be on the lookout for yellow handholds, although they're still here in abundance. But now you can climb anywhere on a rock face. And while this addition feels awesome and great when it works, it has a bunch of issues. First, it's very arbitrary and inconsistent where and when you can climb. Pretty often Aloy doesn't even try to grab a ledge or a handhold, even though she could easily reach it, just because the game wants you to solve some silly puzzle or find another way. Perfectly climbable walls, at least for Aloy, don't let you hold on to because the game decides it doesn't want you to go there. When you're climbing, it doesn't always work as intended. It's very janky and sometimes hard to control. Aloy decides for herself where to leap to and grab onto, and sometimes she even climbs and leaps in the opposite direction of where you're steering. Sometimes she just decides to jump off in whatever direction she feels like, even without you pressing any button. This happened multiple times to me on the same jump in some underground facility. I guess it's a problem with the climbing system they wrote, and I'm sure just plastered over climbable walls. And I guess this system was meant to have the climbing look realistic and grounded, but that's already not the case, since Aloy ignores ledges and handholds, but can hold onto some pretty difficult vertical edges. So maybe having her just stick to a rock face and add a stamina meter might have been a better idea. You know, like in Breath of the Wild. I mean, she also gets a glider to jump off cliffs and soar through the sky. Let's move on. Stealth is as casual as ever. You're invisible in tall grass, and as long as an enemy isn't actively fighting you and you're not directly in front of them, you can silently take them down. There are even items and plants growing in the environment that can render you hidden again even after combat has started. There are some stronger enemies that don't die with a single sneak attack at first, but you can upgrade your sneak attack as well as your equipment, so even this is temporary at best. Melee combat though is a different beast, and while it has its flaws, I don't see why so many people think it's bad. Well, I do have an idea. You see, every offensive maneuver is pretty easy to pull off. Stealth requires nothing more from you than, well, pressing the stealth button. Even when you're spotted, it's easy to get back into hiding. There are multiple instant takedown methods you can perform from stealth without alerting other enemies, and you can even upgrade your abilities to be even more stealthy. You can see patrolling routes of enemies, your focus lets you look through walls, and you have a bunch of movement abilities to get out of danger fast. So as long as you aren't hit with a surprise attack, which can still happen pretty often, you're fine. You have a bunch of ranged weapons with different kinds of ammunition that is easy to craft even in the midst of battle and can deal massive damage against enemies if you use the right tool at the right time. Melee attacks though feel sluggish in comparison to the rest of Aloy's arsenal. All of her attacks have long wind-ups, while enemies can attack very fast and their movements aren't always easy to read. And it seems enemy attacks are prioritized over Aloy's attacks, so even if your attack visually connects with the enemy, since it also hits you, their strike gets registered and not yours. But you can learn enemy attack patterns, you can get accustomed to Aloy's wind-up animations, and you can get a feeling for when to use which combo. Also, your dodge roll is pretty generous when it comes to range and iframes, and you don't have to manage stamina, though if you abuse the dodge maneuver, Aloy will stumble. Once you learned the combat system and have acquired a few combo attacks, you can get a pretty awesome flow going. There's no lock-on system, but I had no problem with Aloy's auto-targeting as of yet. She can cover quite a wide distance to hit an enemy with a melee strike, kinda like Batman, and don't need her hits to connect with the enemy to successfully continue a combo chain. So this combat system is still pretty forgiving, but demands a bit more thought as well as reflexes from the player than the rest of the mechanics. And I guess this, let's call it spike in difficulty, makes it a turn-off for some players. Well, and it sucks when you're bombarded with ranged attacks from all sides. The world is vast and full of side quests, challenges and hidden dungeons. But the game doesn't let you explore how you want. You first have to complete a quite long but not too overbearing tutorial that's completely linear. After that, you are thrown into a pretty large area where you can complete a bunch of side missions and have to earn your right to get to the next portion of the game world. Pretty much like the first game. I guess the developers didn't want you to be overwhelmed if they just threw the whole open world in your face, and with this smaller area you can acclimate yourself with the mechanics and the way exploration works. Breath of the Wild did something similar with the plateau, but there you didn't have to complete an hour-long tutorial beforehand. So yeah, in this aspect as well the game is nothing like Breath of the Wild. It seems I fell victim to some clickbait. The game keeps you on a leash pretty often and has you follow specific steps at certain moments, because it wants to tell a tightly crafted story. I mean, look at it. Every main mission, even every side quest, comes with strongly characterized NPCs and has a small story attached to it. The writing isn't great, and most of the time it's just passable and very contrived, but the acting is incredible. And it does its job. I have a few gripes with some silly scenes, like when a soldier fights effortlessly against multiple machines in a confined space, and after he downed the ones closest to him and has a moment to breathe, another one suddenly sneaks up on him by charging towards him and he doesn't notice. Damn, even the assassins in Oblivion had the decency to appear from a hiding spot to kill the king. In a battle relatively early in the game, Aloy is the most competent fighter on the field, but during cutscenes she seems to disappear from the world because she does nothing to help or prevent the death of her allies. Well, maybe she just doesn't want to, because most of the time she behaves like a narcissistic and entitled bitch.
Fine. Captain's a friend of mine, you know?
She pretends to be humble and doesn't want to be deified as the savior, but she acts like everyone is beneath her and does play the savior card when it fits her needs. She also never shuts up.
I can grab this from my stash later. I'll stash this away for later. I can get data to override machines from cauldrons. Just need to find one.
She's constantly talking to herself, repeating the same lines over and over again, mentioning things you've already done, and she even talks over audio logs you intentionally played.
Now the processing work of a Titan, on the other hand, well, if you're used to
Check it
that.
out.
But once I load
This
your
game doesn't even have the courtesy to lower the volume of either the audio log or Aloy herself. Visually, the game is stunning, but it is very much a PS4 game. An awesome looking PS4 game, but a PS4 game nonetheless, even with the PS5 upgrade. Yeah, as a true gamer, I of course bought the PS4 version and downloaded the free PS5 upgrade. I mean, this version is just a better deal for versatility alone, because now I can lend the game to friends that don't own a PS5. And I believe the only reason why the PS5 version is needlessly more expensive is just to accustom us to the PS5's generally higher prices. It's a shitty move from Sony and it needs to stop. The DualSense implementation is once again pretty awesome though. And while the game has awesome visuals and looks great in stills, it had to take a lot of shortcuts and still has a lot of visual issues. Animations and especially facial animations can look really weird at times. There are a lot of clipping errors, clothes and hair jerks around or clips through the bodies. The frame rate can drop at times, though this didn't happen too often to me. And well, it's a miracle the game runs this well when you look at what's going on in every single scene or screenshot you see from this game. The air is filled with millions of particles, plants and weeds cover pretty much every natural surface, insects and critters run or hover around everywhere. To accomplish this visual quantity, the game had to utilize some trickery from 2 generations ago, but as long as you don't get too close to it, it looks just great. Art design and environmental design are incredible. Clothing, building styles and of course the machines are designed with so much care and result in a visual treat. It really gets you to explore every nook and cranny of this beautiful world. And as it is common for modern games, you can find a bunch of bugs and glitches and graphical issues. Shadows appearing and disappearing depending on where you turn the camera, resources spawning inside other objects so that you can't interact with them. I also couldn't talk to a merchant, though that wasn't a glitch. The stores just hadn't opened yet, but the icons were displayed over the merchants' heads, which was a bit confusing. What was a glitch though was when both my melee buttons just stopped working during a boss fight. The game registered me pressing them and I could even charge up my spear, but the attack just didn't happen. It worked after reloading the checkpoint. Things like these don't happen too often, but are still a bit annoying. Another weird thing is how Aloy behaves when she stands on a wooden beam or a piece of scaffolding. She's just flailing around like the ground is shaking. This girl is athletic as hell, can shoot her bow from horseback, is free climbing and jumping around small footholds all the time, and she can't keep her balance on a platform wide enough for both her feet. I guess they wanted it to look more interesting, but it just comes off as silly. And right afterwards she does this. Perfect poise. Another thing that annoys me is the way actions are mapped to the controller. Multiple actions are mapped to a single button, and rather than having to press or to hold the button for different actions, they're used contextually just by tapping it. And that often leads to Aloy not carrying out the input correctly. A takedown and a quick attack are both performed by tapping R1. So sometimes Aloy will continue to wail on an enemy instead of going for a clean kill, because the button prompt disappeared the moment you pressed due to Aloy turning a pixel too far or some other bullshit. Picking up resources and interacting with objects are both mapped to the triangle button, so you can miss out on special resources when, for example, they're close to a rappel point. Really sucks when this happens. A thing that didn't annoy me was how the game handles notes. You can find books, scrolls and datapads that you have to scan to read them. They get automatically added to your database where you can read up on useful information. Now, at times you find a ruin of the more civilized past, small dungeons more often than not, where you have to solve simple puzzles, pushing conveniently placed crates around, finding points to attach your grappling hook to tear down walls or pull yourself towards it. And sometimes you'll have to find a code for a door or console. And it was a great idea that while every document gets added to your database, you don't actually collect it. It still remains physically in the game world and can be scanned once over, because you'd never find it again in your log. So kudos for that. Another helpful little thing that's also quite immersive is that lootable machines have these little electric spark effects, and collectible plants have butterflies hovering around them, so that they stand out against the environment and don't require you to use your focus ability all the time. Exploring the world and fighting enemies or completing quests rewards you with XP to level up and sometimes skill points, which you can spend on a bunch of skills and abilities. Most are once again passive stat upgrades like higher damage with a certain weapon, better defense or more concentration during archery. But there are also some neat combos and abilities that require more from you than just pressing a button. At least, not always. Core as well as special abilities seem a bit more involved in the sequel compared to the first game. This game is definitely an upgrade to the first game, at least gameplay wise, and while the flaws are plentiful, I still have a blast playing this game. Story wise it might be a step back, though I don't think that the first game was a masterpiece in storytelling. It is a great game and will most certainly be called the best PS5 game or the best open world game or similar things by a lot of critics and enthusiasts alike. That's why I'm giving my opinion on it, not to tear it apart, but to give a bit of perspective in the midst of the upcoming universal praise. So make of it what you want, I guess. Nevertheless, I wish you the greatest of days. That's it from Rady, and I hope to see you again on the next game.
On top of old satellite dishes. There we go. Time to override the big